Hey, what's up guys, it's Nick2, and today I'm going to be showing you guys what the best weapons are to look out for in the Division 2 and why. I spent a pretty long time kind of just like staring at spreadsheets, doing all the math, making sure everything was correct, testing things within game, and all sorts of other stuff in order to make this video possible. So if this helps you out, please drop a like, as that actually does help me out a ton. But anyways, let's get right into it. So my main goal with this video is to be able to show you guys what the absolute best weapon is for each weapon type, and then once we have that definitively figured out via like objective math and whatnot, then I'll get into comparing all of the different weapon types to each other. One thing to note though is that not all things are black and white. Yes, in most cases a specific gun can be proven to be objectively better than another gun, but there are a plethora of other things to keep in mind when comparing guns to each other, and I'll definitely make sure to get into that. I'm just prefacing the rest of the video with this because I don't want you guys to see like the first numbers that pop up on screen and immediately assume, okay, that's better than this. There's often much more that goes into it than that. In direct contrast to this, please try to ignore your anecdotal experiences with guns because, in many instances, certain guns just straight up simply are better in every way, shape, and form. And of course, I'll be able to prove that to you guys and explain why. But I kind of just felt the need to say this prior to getting into it because I didn't want anybody to get the wrong idea and click off the video being misinformed. Okay, so first off, in order to determine what guns are best in each weapon type, we have to normalize each gun, get their respective base damage, rate of fire, reload speed, and mod slots all written down, and convert that into a DPS statistic, otherwise known as damage per second, and also get a damage per minute statistic, which will account for reloading and reload time, mag size, etc. Luckily, there's already a spreadsheet that has all of this information, which makes my life 100 times easier, although some things were a little bit wrong, so I had to triple check just to make sure that I wasn't getting any info wrong. A big thanks to Admiral Regis. I would leave a link to this spreadsheet in the description, but for some reason it randomly got restricted and I still had the spreadsheet open, so I was still able to get all the information I needed. Not really sure why that happened, but I double checked all the info and everything that I used is correct. So as you can see on screen, there are a shit ton of numbers, but most importantly being the DPS and DPM calculations for each gun. So you would think it stops there, you just look at the list, pick whichever gun has the best combination of DPS and DPM, right? Well, no, it's actually much more involved than that. This spreadsheet actually doesn't take into account weapon mods because there are so many different types of mods for each slot, so it wouldn't really make sense for them to apply that. And these calculations are pretty much just the guns without any mods at all. And of course, as we know, weapon mods can drastically affect the effectiveness of a gun. Here is a quick example. So here we have the FAMAS, which appears to be the best AR here because of its extremely high burst DPS and relatively good DPM. But as you can see, the FAMAS doesn't have a magazine slot. This will mean that the burst DPS is going to stay the same, but the DPM will suffer greatly in comparison to, say, the P416, the gun with the second highest DPS. Because unlike the FAMAS, the P416 actually can have a magazine slot. So if we were to put a magazine on the P416, as you can see, the DPM skyrockets past the FAMAS because the FAMAS can't put a magazine on it. This is true with pretty much every weapon type. So in all honesty, looking at the base DPS and DPM for the most part is pretty relevant unless you're comparing two guns that have the exact same default mag size and weapon slot capabilities, such as comparing the P416 to the MK16. So to determine what the actual best guns are in each category, you have to determine which guns are better than other guns by default, share the same mod slots, and figure out which gun is the best by comparing and contrasting each gun with each other. It would probably take me over an hour just to show you guys all of the math and every individual reason why I chose this mod over this mod, this gun over this gun, etc, etc. So you're kind of just going to have to trust me on this one. But after typing in numbers into spreadsheets extensively, here are the highest DPS guns in each category, and keep in mind that this is with 0% crit chance, 0% crit damage, 0% headshot damage, and this is not including each gun's passive bonus, such as crit damage, health damage, damage as car gets out of cover, etc. We're just looking at the raw numbers to figure out which gun is best for each weapon type. And afterwards, we're going to compare the weapon types against each other. So I'm rating the guns based off of their damage per minute because in most scenarios, that is going to be what is most relevant. But I'll also be telling you guys what the best gun is in each category for burst damage, otherwise known as DPS, which would be more relevant in a PvP context. Just know that burst DPS isn't as important as damage per minute in PvE. So starting off, we're going to look at assault rifles. The three best are going to be the P416, the AKM, and the MK16, with the FAMAS having the highest burst potential, but sadly only having a 30 round mag. For SMGs, we have the T821, followed by the SMG9, and then the MP5, with the Vector having an absolute shit ton of burst, but very poor damage per minute. For DMRs, or semi-auto rifles, we have the MK17 stomping the rest of them by a long shot, both having the highest burst and the highest DPM, followed by the ACR and the Urban MDR. But if you're going to use a rifle, I really would just say just use the MK17. The other ones are so far behind it isn't even funny. Moving on to LMGs, we have the M60 on the top with both the highest DPM and the burst. And yes, the M60 does have a higher burst than the MG5. I know that's pretty crazy to think about, but it does. The next two are the MK46 and the M249. They both have very, very similar damage output. They're pretty much the same gun. One of them just has a 0.5 second slower reload time, which doesn't make that big of a difference. So since they're basically the same gun, I figured that I might as well include the RPKs too as being the technical third, since those I think are they're basically tied at second. Now moving on to snipers, this is where things get a little tricky. I decided to only include one bolt action sniper, which does have the highest DPM and burst, if you even want to call it that. But I shouldn't feel the need to include the rest because you play significantly differently with a bolt action sniper than you would with like a full auto, right? So the only thing that's really super important here is the per bullet damage, and the classic M700 or M700 replica have significantly higher per bullet damage numbers than the rest of them, like by a long shot, and you pretty much just want to be able to one-shot as many NPCs as possible with a sniper, so that's kind of the only thing that matters. There are a few semi-automatic snipers which are actually pretty good, being the MK20 and the SVD, and if you look at it from a pure mathematical standpoint, it seems as if they're very, very strong. I'll get into why they actually don't end up being like that in a minute, but it's what it is. So there you have it. Those are the best guns in each weapon category. There are a few flaws with this formula though, such as the assumption being made that like with an SVD or any other gun with really high RPM or something, is that you're hitting all of your shots while shooting the gun at max RPM, which for example with an SVD simply just isn't possible. So I would definitely take some of these numbers with a grain of salt. I can assure you though that I did mention all the best guns for each weapon type. I've tested all of these in game. Moving on, what's very difficult to do is to compare each weapon type to each other, which is what we're going to do next. But for example, comparing a P416 to an M60, it's really difficult because it doesn't merely stop at, oh, the P416 has slightly less DPM, so the M60 must be better, right? That's not really how that works, because this DPM calculation is including all kinds of things, some things that are simply just unquantifiable in nature, such as the talent like Berserk that you can only use with an SMG or an AR, not an LMG. And this gives you extra damage based on how low your armor is, right? You can't ever put that talent into a pure number form because gaining that talent is entirely circumstantial and it varies from encounter to encounter. The same can be said about the accuracy of the weapons too. Maybe the M60 is mathematically better, but the M249 has significantly better handling. Another flaw with comparing these weapons solely based on DPM or DPS is that you're also assuming that you're shooting at a target for a minute straight, never stopping, and always shooting the second that you're done reloading, meaning that the time spent reloading extremely affects the overall DPM. And as I'm sure we all know, if we have an M60 with like 100 rounds in the mag, we usually don't have to reload while in combat, and if you do, you're probably going to be pretty smart about it. You're usually going to be like, reloading while you're repositioning or something like that. So in that instance, DPM isn't the end all be all because the reload speed isn't that big of a deal there. But just like with the talent I mentioned, it's entirely circumstantial and it's very hard to put into number form, which is why DPM is kind of the best thing that we have right now to calculate this. These calculations also exclude weapon talents because some guns can get weapon talents that other gun types can't, and I also am not including the inherent buff that you get from each weapon type, such as health damage or damage to targets out of cover, as these things are also unquantifiable as well. And of course, what gun you use is going to be heavily dependent on your build, the weapon mods you have unlocked so far, the specialists that you're running, how much crit damage or crit chance or headshot damage you can obtain, etc, etc, etc. So the reason I say all of this is because I want you to take the following numbers with a huge grain of salt and realize that there is much, much more that goes into it. But anyways, what I've done to compare the top guns of each weapon category is I created a base character sheet so that I can fairly compare all of the weapons to each other to the best of my ability by altering the numbers to more express what would be more realistic in most scenarios, such as, for example, lowering the RPM of the MK17, considering that in real-time use, you can't actually shoot it at max RPM and have the same accuracy as you would with, say, an assault rifle. This base character sheet is going to have 40% crit chance, 50% crit damage, and 50% headshot damage, and I'm also going to assume that 60% of your shots fired are headshots. I know that some of these numbers might seem pretty low, but I think they're relatively obtainable with pretty much any build. so I felt that they would be a good baseline. I then will do the math with all the weapons, doing my best to include their respective individual buffs such as crit damage, and also make sure to change the headshot multiplier based on that gun's default multiplier. Some guns such as LMGs will have like different headshot multipliers than other guns. I'm also going to assume that you're using the best weapon mods possible for this gun, but I will be excluding any mods with damage to elites, so just keep that in mind. So without further ado, here you go. Here are the numbers. But like I said though, take it with a heavy grain of salt. I did my best to be fair when comparing these, but in all honesty, it took a lot of guesswork because like I said before, it's impossible to put health damage, for example, into a pure percent increase because it simply just doesn't work like that. I also did a few other things, such as assume you hit more headshots while using a sniper than you would with other gun types, because the RPM is much slower and you gain way more from hitting headshots with a sniper, so you're inclined to line up your shots more. But I also compensated this by lowering the RPM. I did a few other things as well. Hopefully all that makes sense to you. I would never try to be like disingenuous with the numbers, and I obviously don't really have any reason to tamper with RPMs of certain guns or something to make them appear better than others. A lot of this is just conjecture and pure guesswork though, but since it's impossible to determine what the best gun truly is just because of all of these different variables, this is kind of the best that I can do so far. If you for whatever reason think I'm like an idiot and I'm terrible with numbers and incapable of altering certain weapon attributes to come to a more fair conclusion or whatever the hell, then fine, you don't have to trust these numbers. You can just pay attention to the DPM numbers I mentioned previously, as I didn't really tamper with those at all. Those are just directly from in-game, so if you don't want to believe me, I guess you can just refer to those, but there you have it. Real quickly before I end the video, I'm going to give a quick list of pros and cons that each weapon type has over other weapon types so that when you're trying to decide what gun to use, you can make a much more fair assessment. So starting off with LMGs, these actually have the highest base headshot multiplier in the game besides snipers, being at 65%. LMGs exclusively can get both talents Frenzy and Unhinged, which if used properly can net more damage than almost any other weapon talent in the game. Certain LMGs do have pretty bad accuracy though, or time to shorten the bloom, making you miss more shots initially as compared to something like an AR. LMGs also suppress enemies, which can be viewed as both a good and a bad thing. Sometimes it helps you if you don't want enemies peeking you, but other times they'll hide from you and all you want in that instance is for them to peek. So it kind of just depends on the circumstance. Another thing is that large round LMGs such as an M60 also have the longest reload time in the game other than like an M700 sniper, and if you're caught in a bad situation that could easily end up getting you killed. Moving on, ARs and SMGs can both benefit from the talent Berserk, while other guns can't, which in certain situations can net you a ton of damage. Assault rifles have relatively decent range and very good accuracy and stability, while SMGs have extremely limited range and very poor accuracy if you aren't very close to your target. ARs, however, only benefit from health damage as their buff, which against red NPCs can be pretty good, but against all other NPCs, it's not that great, while SMGs get crit chance, which is significantly more beneficial. Assault rifles by default get 55% headshot damage, while SMGs get a mere 50%. SMGs also get 20% crit chance on their muzzle if you have the right SMG, which is great, and they also are able to get crits on enemies that are within 10 meters of them, while other guns can't. Unfortunately though, I don't think that SMGs are all that good in PvE because you can't consistently land headshots due to how bad the bloom is, unless you're like right up in the enemy's faces, which in most cases isn't a good idea either because you'll probably end up getting killed that way. Moving on to snipers, these can be good in certain situations considering that they can actually one-shot snipers, and you can also play with a sniper from very, very far away, but a downfall is that the second you miss a shot, you immediately fall behind the potential damage of any other gun in that scenario. Snipers also don't have that many gun talents that are going to increase your damage by a significant amount, which is pretty unfortunate, but anyways, rifles on the other hand actually offer you the same capability when it comes to playing at a range, just like a sniper, but you can also use them at a close range without much risk as they're very easy to shoot quickly. And they also give you 60% headshot damage by default. Some of the rifles, however, with very high RPM are pretty bad because their base damage is very low to compensate how fast they shoot, and it's not at all beneficial to full spray a rifle because you'll end up missing a ton of your shots, whereas with a low firing, higher damage one, you could hit more headshots. But anyways, that about wraps it up for the pros and cons of each gun type. I'm sure there's a few things that I've left out, but I've been working on this video for a very long time now, so I'm just going to hope that this suffices for now. I hope you guys enjoyed and that this helped. Like I said, my main goal is to just tell everyone what the best gun for each weapon type was, and then maybe give you all some insight as to what some positives and negatives are for certain guns, so you are more informed when making a decision about which weapon to use. Anyways, thanks for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, please make sure to drop a like, subscribe, comment below, follow me on Twitch, all that good stuff. Like I said, this video took forever, so any support would be very appreciated. But anyways, I'll see you guys later. Peace out.